Let's discuss gambling, a topic that comes up on this channel about every month. Funnily enough, typically comes up just after I've been paid for the month. And then doesn't come up for the next sort of 4 weeks because typically I've lost my money and have to wait till next time round before I can go back in again. Now, I guess it's fair to say I've had some gambling losses recently. I've been betting on long shots. I haven't been betting on things that I thought were dead certs. I've been betting on value grounds. So even though I've made a few losses, it's not exactly like I've been losing on odds-on favourites here. The two notable losses, I took Willie Monroe Jr. to last the distance against Golovkin. I didn't bet Monroe Jr. to win. I bet him not to get knocked out. And I think I got something like 16, 17 to 1 on a gambling exchange for him to last the distance. Similarly, I bet Kevin Johnson to last the distance against Anthony Joshua. On both occasions I was wrong. On both times the heavily odds-on favourites, Golovkin and Joshua, were able to get the job done and win by knockout, so I lost both times. Luckily I was able to recoup some losses. I had James DeGale against Andre Durrell. That was an odds-on favourite bet. I think I got about 10 to 11 on that, and that made some way back. But here we are. I've had a little bit of a break, and now I'm back in. And I wanted to discuss gambling opportunities this weekend in boxing, and there are two that spring to mind. And I'm going to explain to you why I'm betting on one of them and why I'm going to keep my powder dry on the other one. Brian Rose versus Carson Jones. This is a fight that Brian Rose is supposed to win. Despite getting knocked out by Carson Jones in the first fight, Brian Rose is 1-2 to win this fight. The bookies make Carson Jones a 13-8 underdog, or certainly Ladbrokes do, who I was just looking at their odds before making this video. For me, this is an interesting fight. As we've already discussed, Brian Jones is supposed to win this fight. He's the home fighter. He's the one with the money behind him. He's the one who's supposedly got this career in front of him. Carson Jones, less so. Carson Jones is travelling. He's travelled to be an opponent for Kell Brook twice in the UK. And yet again, he finds himself here as the opponent. For me, Carson Jones is a tough operator, a difficult nut to crack, and can be a tough opponent for any fighter on his day. But he's not a prolific fighter. He's not someone I typically expect to come over and cause problems. For me, whilst Carson Jones is a tough matchup, he doesn't fall into that category of a Tony Thompson, a real skilled upsetter of odds, in my opinion. Yes, Carson Jones did knock out Brian Rose in the first fight. It was a dubious stoppage. I'm not saying that I necessarily agreed with it, or didn't agree with it, but it was a controversial stoppage. Secondly, Brian Rose was comprehensively outboxing Carson Jones in the first round. And I know it was only the first round because the fight only lasted a few minutes. But essentially he got caught, he got clipped. It can happen in boxing. He was defensively lax for a second and he got dropped and stopped. He got knocked out. And the referee, called a halt to proceedings, I guess you could say. Of course it can happen again. But realistically, everything's in Brian Rose's favour. And for Carson Jones to upset the apple cart yet again, I think he's probably going to need to put in an even better performance than he did first time round. Because I think Brian Rose will hopefully have learnt from the mistakes. He'll have put his training camp together around those mistakes. And he'll have worked out, what can I do to avoid those things happening again. Most importantly, in deciding when to bet on a fight, however, is the odds. Now, I've had various people commenting on my videos saying they got 4-1, I think, on Carson Jones to win the fight first time round. 4-1, Carson Jones versus Brian Rose, is an excellent bet. Whilst Carson Jones is not prolific, neither is Brian Rose. He's a technician, but he's very light-handed, very feather-fisted, which means typically he's not going to win by knockout, eliminating one way of him ending the fight. He's also quite hittable. he's a vulnerable fighter, and I expect him to get exposed consistently as he steps up to the top level, as we've seen, in this fight against Demetrius Andrade. My point is, the people who bet on Carson Jones first time out, and I'm not one of them, were shrewd gamblers. But the reason they were shrewd, in my mind, is not necessarily because they picked Carson Jones to beat Brian Rose, but it's because they took the 4-1 and got the value there. This time round, at 13-8, I don't see the value there. Yet again, all the odds are against Carson Jones. He's fighting away from home on an opponent's show, where he's been brought in as an opponent. But this time, the opponents had time to reflect on what went wrong, to make adjustments, to reflect that in his training camp. I see it being a harder job for Carson Jones. And at 13-8, I'm not sure a gambler's being rewarded sufficiently for taking that price. Put simply, for a fighter B to turn up to fighter A's fight, promoted by fighter A's promoter, at fighter A's venue, with fighter A's fans, and for fighter B to upset fighter A, you want more than 13-8. Especially when fighter B is Carson Jones, who, as we've already mentioned, is decent, but probably no more than decent. Conversely, the Danny Garcia versus Paulie Malignaggi fight represents a real betting opportunity in my mind, and I'll lay my cards on the table. For myself, I've had what I would class as a large bet on Paulie Malignaggi to win. Again, this is a case of fighter B, Malignaggi, travelling to fighter A. Not geographically, perhaps. I'm not talking about geography on this occasion. But what I'm saying is Garcia is the money fighter. Garcia has the undefeated record. Garcia has the promotional team behind him. Garcia has all the momentum and that big sort of future ahead of him. Someone I was tweeting about said to me, Paulie's going to have to beat Garcia and the 3 judges. And that's very, very relevant, because Garcia, like Brian Rose, Malignaggi, like Brian Rose, is very, very feather-fisted. Very feather-fisted. So we won't be seeing a knockout here in all likelihood, eliminating one way for Paulie to win the fight. However, in my mind, whereas you're not getting rewarded for Carson Jones to beat Brian Rose, you are getting overly rewarded for Paulie Malignaggi to beat Danny Garcia. I've just taken, for my fairly large bet, 6-1 with Ladbrokes on Paulie Malignaggi to beat Carson Jones. Sorry, I'm really making a mess of this. On Paulie Malignaggi to beat Danny Garcia. 6-1. I acknowledge that I will probably lose my money. I acknowledge that Danny Garcia has a greater than 50% chance of winning this fight. And I acknowledge that Garcia will be the favourite. When I placed the bet, I didn't necessarily think it's going to be a winning bet. I hope it is, but I don't think on the balance of probability it will be. What I do think is, in my mind, the percentages that I give Paulie Malignaggi of winning this fight are not reflective in the odds. I think Paulie Malignaggi should be between 5-2 and 3-1. I think Paulie Malignaggi has about a 25 to 30% chance of winning this fight. And the reason I think that is because of various things that are at play in this fight. For a start, I think Garcia's kryptonite is someone who can jab and move. Paulie brings that to a table. Secondly, Garcia at 147 is really, really unknown. We don't know how he's going to react at 147. Sure, he's a big light welterweight, but will his supposed power transfer to the new weight class against a guy like Malignaggi, who's been in with a lot of big punchers? Miguel Cotto, Amir Khan, Sean Porter, Ricky Hatton, Adrian Broner, the list goes on. Thirdly, I'm not actually convinced about Danny Garcia's power. We've seen him knock out Amir Khan, great, but we know about Khan's chin. I've seen lesser guys than Malignaggi go the difference with Danny Garcia. I mean, look at the success Mauricio Herrera had against him. I know Herrera and Malignaggi are different fighters, But is it impossible that Malignaggi could have similar success? Look at the success Lamont Peterson had against him. Is it possible that Malignaggi couldn't have the same success as Lamont Peterson? My points are, Malignaggi, yes, he did get stopped last time out, but he's typically durable. His style is the style that I would choose to beat Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia's looked poor recently. He's moving up in weight, and it's unclear whether his slightly crude tactics and slightly overrated punching power, in my opinion, will be as effective against the seasoned vet former world champion in Paulie Malignaggi. I acknowledge I'll probably lose my money because the judges, the promoters, the fans will be behind Danny Garcia. The momentum's certainly behind Danny Garcia. Paulie's getting old. He's got other commitments outside of the ring. He's a promising analyst. Paulie got hideously knocked out last time he stepped in the ring and had health problems following on from that, as I understand it. As much as the momentum is with Garcia, it's against Malignaggi. But in this fight, unlike the Brian Rose fight, you were getting a real premium on Paulie to win. 6-1 suggests that if this fight happens 7 times, Paulie wins it once. I suggest if this fight happens 4 times, Paulie wins it once. And I think on value grounds, and value grounds alone, the bet for me is Paulie Malignaggi to win. Danny Garcia will need to improve from the Lamont Peterson performance to win this fight. Firstly, because it's a new weight class, and secondly, because Malignaggi is a more active fighter with a higher output through his jab than Lamont Peterson. The Malignaggi jab is more consistent in its presence than against Peterson. For me, Garcia needs to improve, he needs to adapt to the new weight class, and he needs to work out how to beat a style that is made to expose him. As I say, he's the favourite. It could be a close fight. But on the balance of probability, I'm happy that I've backed Paulie Malignaggi at 6-1. And I'm happy that I've stayed away from backing Carson Jones at 13-8. I'm not saying Carson Jones won't win. I'm not saying Malignaggi will win. But you get sufficiently rewarded for backing Paulie. Whereas in my opinion, at the prices, for want of a better term, you're getting mugged off backing Carson Jones, who has all the odds against him, at such a short price. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please give me the thumbs up.